from the University of Auckland School of Law, Associate Professor Carrie Leonetti. Carrie is an associate professor and an internationally recognised expert on the intersection of science and the law. Her research focuses on many things, but two of the more interesting ones for us today is miscarriages of justice and scientific evidence. Welcome to the show, Carrie.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming on and having a chat about this. I guess technically it's proposed legislation because it hasn't gone through yet, but what the national-led government wants to do. The proposed legislation for what we are colloquially calling the banning of gang patches, is akin to quite a controversial law based in Western Australia. Could you unpack the similarities and how this works itself out in Western Australia?
Sure. As I understand the proposed legislation, and we don't have language here yet, it will do three things. It will prohibit the sort of public display of gang insignia. It will allow courts to issue these sort of anti-consorting orders that ban gang members from being around each other for 7 days. And it will allow police to issue dispersal orders on the spot to order gang members who are together to disperse. And those are the same three characteristics that the Western Australia law has.
The other one it does here is it says that they're going, and I like they've used the word in the press conference yesterday, ensure, quite a lot. This will ensure. I'm like, that's pretty confident to say this is 100% absolutely going to do this. Like one of the things is banning gang members from communicating with each other. I'm not sure if this government understands what Gmail is or cell phones, but that's what they say they're going to ensure happens. But that's a part of this one as well, isn't it?
Or social media. So this has been one of the things they've struggled with in implementation in Western Australia is, so I'm a member of a gang and I post a Facebook picture of me and another person with gang insignia. That presumably violates the anti-insignia part of the law. And so the sheer logistics of trying to police consorting and displaying insignia online, I think, is formidable.
Yeah, and look, probably just enforcing it, not even online, but in general. I have a piece lined up that I thought might come up a little bit later in the conversation, but we might as well bring it up right now. Last year, we had a conversation with Chester Burrows, who's the former National Party Minister for Police, and he was a part of the Whanganui desire to ban gang patches. And he made a comment last year about purely the policing of, the banning of gang patches. And this is what he had to say.
The problem you've got with that stuff is, how the hell do you police it? If you've got 250 gang members riding down the southern motorway on the, on a tangi of one of their dearly departed, and they're all got their gang patches on, are the police going to block the motorway and take their patches off them and confiscate them for a period of time and arrest them all and charge them and put them before the courts and meanwhile hold up 50,000 other commuters trying to get home? And the answer is probably not. And the problem there is the proponents of the legislation have created an expectation amongst the public that they will. So Then there's an uproar that they didn't do what they said they were going to do, and they've got the powers to do it, but they didn't do it, and the police cowards, why didn't they do it? All of that sort of stuff. And pretty much everyone just gets pissed off, don't want to do it. They just, the police aren't happy because they don't want to spend their time doing something as ridiculous, confiscating gang patches. The public aren't happy because they expected a level of service which they're not getting. The proponents of the legislation aren't happy because, they didn't do what the law says they can do. So where do you end up?
So that was Chester Burrows last year kind of spelling out that the physical policing of it as well. He also went on in that conversation to talk about, and I guess he was referencing what happened in Whanganui, that it doesn't make good legislation, but it does make a good headline. Do you get the sense that this is similar to that? It's good fodder and it's good, tough on crime, but the legislation's actually harder to bring together?
It may even be counterproductive. So the chief science advisor for Aotearoa New Zealand did an extensive evidence-based report last year on how to sort of decrease gang membership and minimize gang-related harm. And it actually reached the opposite conclusion of this. It concluded that we need to treat gang membership and gang-related crime as a public health issue. Think about why people join gangs, why gangs behave the way they do. It's often through processes of marginalization. And that these sort of tough on crime policies, they make great sound bites, but they may actually make worse these processes of marginalization, rebellion against authority. I mean, all the things that sort of attract people into gangs. In Western Australia, a lot of the gangs have engaged in these rather public, almost farcical, satirical protests against this law. So now they make gang patches that actually mock politicians in Western Australia. I mean, and they've had hundreds of arrests around this, and it's become a matter of public protest. And so I'm concerned this turns out to be a recruiting tool for gangs. See, we are being singled out. We are being oppressed. The government is ridiculous. They're cracking down on us. I mean, that's a concern that I have. I'd also go farther than just worrying about the police not using the power. When you give police sweeping powers and they choose when to use it and when not to use it, they may choose arbitrarily or discriminatorily. So whether they do round up those people going down the highway may depend on which gang or what the patch is. I mean, I'm just really concerned that they're going to pick and choose who they use this law against in ways that might not be random. They might be discriminatory. And that's going to then drive, I think, a lot of how the gangs feel, right? Gangs tend to be located in communities that are already marginalized, that already feel cut off from resources, cut off from authorities. And so then when they're singled out and targeted for selective enforcement, again, it just drives more into that narrative.
Chester Burrows was talking about, the enforcing of it and how do they do it. And he used the example of 250, motorbikes going down Auckland's southern motorway. Of course, this question was asked of Mr. Luxon pre-election. It was asked, what would you do if there was a gang tangi or a funeral? And he basically said, well, the police officers would go in and get them. And I'm like, what? You're going to put these police officers in harm's way to 300 or whatever the number is gang members. Do you think that's really going to happen? And the other thing I found fascinating is actually, and in fact, it happened this morning as well. I watched the AM show with Chloe Swarbrick and with David Seymour, and no one's talked to the gangs yet. Famously, before the election last year, every time that Christopher Luxon was asked, would you talk to Harry Tam, he said, absolutely not. So ironically, so people know this, we've got Harry Tam coming on this show on Wednesday night live at 9:00. But no one's talking to the gangs, and they're setting out, as Chester Burrows said, this expectation that if there's 250 gang members there, the police are going to go in and sort it out. We all know that's never going to happen, but then it's going to be you didn't stick to what you said you would, or it's going to be you put police in incredibly dangerous harm's way. I don't see how this can work.
And it's a resource issue. Our police are pretty under-resourced in Aotearoa, New Zealand to begin with. So if you have 5 gang members somewhere actually committing serious crimes and you've got 200 gang members at a funeral, I want the police to go to the harm incident. I don't want them to go to the gathering, the consorting incident. I also just want to point out, when we talk about patches, we're not just talking about patches on jackets. At least in Western Australia, they're talking about tattoos. And there have been these really kind of, I think, ridiculous public statements of, well, what is somebody with a gang affiliated or a gang related tattoo, let's say on their neck or face, supposed to do? And they've said, put on makeup, wear a balaclava, or don't leave your house, right? So, I mean, even that, and it'll be interesting to see how they define gang insignia, because a lot of gang symbols are subtle. They're colors, they're a type of clothing, they're a tattoo. They're not necessarily a patch that says, I am a member of the mongrel mob. And again, I mean, that just expands even more what it is they're going to be asked to police and make decisions about what to enforce or not.
Yeah, I mean, last week we had an example of an auto part manufacturer somewhere in Canterbury with a swastika out the front of their shop. Now, I'm not sure. I think it might be the mongrel mob who incorporate the swastika as a part of their insignia. So, I mean, I think it's pretty revolting that auto shop had a swastika, but that's now a gang insignia. So if they'd have to take that down. The auto shop, which is nothing associated with gangs whatsoever. The other thing is about, and it was mentioned with our chat in Chester, and I'm sure it's going to come up for the next year, identifying gang members. I mean, if you've got 3 gang members who are, let's have a stereotype, selling meth, selling pee, and now they're out there just in their leather jackets with no insignia on it, doesn't that make it harder to find them and identify them? Okay, so all small town police officers know the gang members. So if they go from Whanganui down to Wellington for a weekend, are they now actually, because of the government mandate, and I know this government hates that word in other cases, but in this case it's okay, because of the government mandate, they're actually blending in more and harder to find?
Yeah, it did. I mean, that actually struck me too, that gang insignia are probably helpful to the gang officers because you're hanging a sign out saying, I am a member of this
Yeah.
crew. I mean, and it's a mixed bag. There is an intimidation factor to everybody knowing they're a member of that crew. But yeah, I mean, if it worked, then the gang members would go out without the insignia. And then it would be harder to issue a dispersal order. How would you defend a dispersal order if they're not wearing the gang insignia anymore? I mean, so I think a lot of the practical implications of this don't seem to have been very thought through.
Yeah, no, like, so if there's 15 big burly blokes all hanging out together in just, hoodies, are they a rugby team who come down from the other town to play, or are they gang members? The other thing I'm really keen on, and your expertise here in the law, I'd like to know about this. Mr. Seymour said this morning that a bunch of this is about the feelings of intimidation. And I just thought, gosh, are we really going to pass legislation based on people's feelings? And isn't intimidation quite relative? There are some people who see like a $5,000 suit as quite intimidating. Like quite intimidated by this person wearing a Rolex and a $5,000 suit. But he was saying this morning that he was, I'm paraphrasing, but he supports the ban because what this does is it intimidates people, and they feel intimidated. And I'm just like, okay, not to say give the gangs carte blanche, but if we start building legislation based on feelings and based on feelings of intimidation, where can that go?
And feelings of intimidation are not unrelated to ethnicity, nor is gang membership unrelated to ethnicity. I mean, especially if you strip insignia off. So now I've got 15 Tane Maori standing somewhere. So am I going to decide they're a gang because of their ethnicity, because they're not going to have the patches on anymore? I mean, there's no doubt the conduct can be really intimidating. I would think that draws police attention. So anybody who's been roared by one of those motorcycle convoys knows, like, sure, that is intimidating, but there are also a bunch of laws that already violates, right? I mean, you can't drive recklessly, you can't speed, you can't have noise violations. I mean, so the conduct is intimidating, but I get nervous about talking about people or a bunch of people together being a form of intimidation, and pretending that gang membership is not almost entirely ethnically prescribed.
Yeah, but then, and the question I guess I was asking badly is, how do you legislate against people's feelings? Because feelings are relative. People feel whatever, whenever. How and why can you pass legislation into law because someone feels a certain way?
I mean, to be fair, as I understand the legislation, what they're going to legislate is the insignia, a bunch of people in the insignia in one place. So the purpose is that feels intimidating to people. And probably one of the purposes of gang insignia is to do that, is to project that sense of power. I don't think they'll just ban things that make people intimidated. Hopefully they're going to ban specific actions that tend to make people feel intimidated. But there is this bit of a, you haven't done it yet, you just look menacing aspect to this that I worry about. I worry about freedom of movement, freedom of association, freedom of expression. I mean, especially when you start talking about tattoos or you start talking about less obvious types of gang insignia. I mean, it might be an indication that you're a member of a criminal organization, but it might be a political statement. It might be an ideological statement. You might be gathering together. And if there were real evidence of efficacy, it would be a more difficult conversation to me about how much we can restrict people's association rights and their expression rights if it would work. But in the absence of any evidence of efficacy, I mean, the idea that the police can say to people, you have to go home, or you can't hang out with these people, a court could say that. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, our gangs actually tend to have much more of a familial aspect. It's much more common here for siblings or fathers and sons to join the same gang. That's not necessarily true in a lot of other parts of the world. And so even that, I mean, I'm thinking a 7-day no contact order in a gang that has fathers and sons in it. I mean, that's a significant restriction of people's association. And again, if it were effective, if there were evidence that said that, like in Western Australia, they've seen a plummet in their gang-related violence or something, then maybe we talk about when free societies can restrict those things. But with no evidence it'll be effective, I mean, I think there's a huge cost there that has to be weighed against my, at least, skepticism that this is going to have any impact on gang-related harm.
And of course, there's that question that's always going to come around, what is gang insignia? Like, what is sort of what you're saying now? Is it a political statement or not? And we've been thinking here for a long time, Carrie, is that like, and I'm sure they wouldn't do this because I know there's a reason to earn your gang patch. But if one of the gangs decided to turn their patch into a piece of merchandise and make it available for anyone to sell, like, then what? And I'm not suggesting they should do that. And if you're not a part of the gang, I'm not suggesting you wear their patches. Who knows what could happen? But I'm saying if one of them wanted to push back by saying, well, let's just sell it to anyone online now, so anyone could buy it, does that therefore mean that patch was now on someone's back down at the beach in the weekend becomes a gang patch or a piece of merchandise? It just seems, when you can find a way out of the legislation so easily, it doesn't feel like good legislation.
And I mean, this is a bit of an analogy. So, I mean, I grew up as a kid in the United States in the 1980s, and a lot of our sort of original gang insignia laws banned colors. You can't wear all red, all blue, or all yellow, because they're the three predominant street gangs back then. But as a little white girl skipping down the street dressed all in blue, nobody busted me for being a Crip, right? And that's what, so it's a similar point, right? It's not going to be things associated with gangs. It's going to be things associated with gangs on people associated with gangs. Right. And I'm worried that it's the people associated with gangs that may drive the enforcement.
So you're saying the little white girl in a Portuguese is probably going to be left alone, but the teenage brown boy is going to be landed on.
Yeah, if I ironically bought, I mean, again, I'm not, this is something I probably do, but if I ironically bought a t-shirt with a gang insignia, maybe because I want to stick it to the government about restricting freedom of expression, I'm probably not. I highly doubt I mean, a middle-aged white law professor, I'm not going to get busted for ironically wearing a mongrel mob t-shirt at a protest. I agree. It may not, I'm guessing the mongrel mob would prefer I not do that, but maybe it wouldn't. I mean, it may very well be that this triggers allied free expression movements. And yeah, I mean, because again, a lot of what you've seen in Western Australia is just, I think it's becoming farcical. These on these sort of public battles between these gangs mocking the law and the government then cracking down on insignia related mocking of the law. You could see a broader set of people going, I don't really like gang related violence, but I empathize with somebody being busted for wearing a jacket.
But this is the whole thing, and you said you grew up in America. This American understanding of free speech, which is I hate what you're saying, I despise what you're saying, but I protect your right to say it. And it kind of feels like there's a parallel to, I don't vibe on your gang patch and what it represents, but, freedom of expression, I support your right to wear it, sort of thing. It's like there's that whole conversation to be had as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, just because something is expression doesn't mean it should never be able to be restricted. But I personally see political aspects. So a lot of people sort of affiliate with gangs when they're incarcerated in prison, right? I mean, that's an entry point into gangs, and they become a protest against their incarceration. So to me, I mean, I'm a woman, and a lot of these gangs affiliate with things like violence against women. So it's not like I think just because it's expression, we have to protect it. But I think it's more complicated than this. I think a lot of, for instance, Maori and Pacifica gangs have kind of anti-colonial ideologies. They may also have other really destructive and antisocial ideologies, but I get worried about cracking all that down. I think it's important to say not all gang members are criminals. Not all gang members commit crimes. I mean, while gangs collectively are associated with crimes, people join gangs who don't commit crimes. And then that person's wearing the patch might mean something else. We've seen older gang members really working to kind of rehabilitate the gangs. I don't know if it's real or a public relations stunt, but if it's real, if they're working to change what those gangs mean, then that expression, that to me takes on a different level of value, one that we start, so this isn't like Nazis have a right to protest in the streets, freedom of expression, at least to me. These are complicated relationships, complicated affiliations, and there may be a value to somebody, saying, I identify with this marginalized community. I come from this marginalized community. The state took away my dad, so I joined a gang to replace my dad. I'm not sure I think that's valueless expression.
Yeah. Ironically, about the right for Nazis to march, of course, that famous case in Skokie in the 1960s, I think. I've spoken to the professor who actually took that case. We did a podcast with them, so they allowed it to happen. Hey, finally, you mentioned the words ally before, like, if someone was going to be an ally for the freedom of expression. Then the next step up from that is, and you talk about growing up in America, you saw with the Rodney King situation, the Crips and the Bloods coming together. There's famous pictures of their do-rags being tied together. So what are they going to do when 1,000 mongrel mob and Black Power and killer bees and headhunters, whatever they're called, all come together and head down to Wellington for a bit of a hangi on the front lawn of Parliament? Then what? they'll just be called out for not being able to handle it, and nothing will happen, and everyone will look, well, the government trying to be hard on crime will look incredibly foolish.
Yeah, and I mean that's a political protest. I mean, and then that's the kind of, I feel like, is that we want them to focus on gangs that are engaged. We want to give them something to protest against, and then focus on gangs that are engaged in political protest, or do we actually just want them busting meth labs? I mean, I just want them busting meth labs,
Yeah.
And I actually don't care what's on the person's jacket.
Yeah. From University of Auckland, that's Carrie Leonetti joining us this afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciated your insights. It was very useful.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you.